She fell down the stairs by herself. The son shouted to the doctors. He didn't know that I had turned on the recorder in my pocket 2 minutes before he pushed me. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own body hitting the wooden steps. Once, twice, maybe 3 times before I landed at the bottom like a sack of flour. My right arm twisted under me and something cracked. Then silence. For a moment there was only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of my heartbeat, slow and uneven. Then his voice. She fell down the stairs. Ethan's voice panicked, high-pitched, breaking through the still air like glass. She just slipped. Please, someone call an ambulance. I wanted to answer him to tell the paramedics the truth before they arrived, but my mouth wouldn't move. My body felt detached, foreign. Somewhere deep inside, the memory flickered. The small click of a button in my jacket pocket 2 minutes earlier. I had turned on the recorder. The world came back in flashes, the blue lights, heavy boots on the porch, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. Someone lifted my head and asked questions I couldn't answer. Ethan was there, kneeling beside me, his hands trembling, his voice full of theatrical fear. "Mom, I told you that carpet on the stairs was dangerous," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The paramedic nodded, already forming a narrative in his mind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them he was lying, but all I could do was stare at his face. The same face I'd kissed goodnight thousands of times, and wonder when it had become a stranger's. In the ambulance, I drifted in and out of consciousness. I heard Ethan talking to the EMT, calm, now collected. "She's been dizzy lately," he said, his tone professional, almost kind. "Maybe low blood sugar. I told her to get checked, but you know how stubborn she is." He even chuckled softly. That chuckle burned more than the broken ribs. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the hospital. The ceiling was too white, too clean. My arm was in a sling, my ribs bandaged. A nurse hovered nearby, checking monitors. She smiled politely. "Your son's in the waiting area. He hasn't left your side." Of course he hadn't. As she left, fragments of memory started to return. His words before it happened. The way he stood too close on the landing. The way his jaw tightened. "Mom, you need to stop telling people I borrowed money from you," he'd said. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. "It makes Claire uncomfortable." I had laughed nervously. "Ethan, I didn't tell anyone. Maybe your wife." And then the flash of anger, so quick I almost missed it. He stepped forward, his voice softer now. "Honey, you really should rest more, Mom. You're tired. Sometimes you get confused." I remember thinking, why is he saying this? And then just before the shove, a sudden instinct. My hand slipped into my jacket pocket, pressing the small black button on the recorder. I'd started carrying it months ago after our arguments had turned darker. I told myself it was for my own peace of mind. I never thought I'd actually need it. Now, lying in that hospital bed, the memory felt unreal. Could he really have meant to push me? Maybe it was an accident. Maybe I stumbled. That's what the rational part of me tried to say. But my bruised body, the fear still pulsing through me, told another story. The morning light filtered through the blinds in my hospital room, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. I'd been here for 2 days, though it felt like 2 years. The nurse, Stephanie according to her name tag, checked my vitals and asked how I was feeling. Fine, I lied. The 3 broken ribs, fractured arm, and bruises that painted my side in shades of purple and yellow suggested otherwise. My name is Margaret Lewis, though most everyone calls me Maggie. For 40 years I was a nurse at Oakwood General, tending to the sick and broken until my retirement 5 years ago at 63. Now at 68, I found myself on the other side of the hospital bed, vulnerable in ways I never imagined. My husband Robert passed 15 years ago, heart attack in the middle of the night. Quick and final, leaving me alone to raise our son Ethan, who was 25 then. I worked double shifts, picked up weekend rotations, did whatever was necessary to help him finish college. He was studying business marketing, and I was so proud. The $450,000 house I owned was paid off thanks to Robert's life insurance and decades of careful saving. My retirement account held $275,000, money that no one, not even Ethan, knew the full extent of. And now here I was, trying to make sense of how my only child had become someone I no longer recognized. The door to my room opened, and there he stood. Ethan, 6 feet tall with his father's strong jawline and my hazel eyes. His expression was perfectly composed, worried gentle, the ideal son. He sat beside my bed, took my hand. "You scared me to death," he said softly. Claire's at home making soup. She wanted to come, but I told her you'd need rest. His thumb brushed over my fingers like he used to when he was a boy. For a second, I almost believed it. Then I saw the faint red mark on his wrist, my nail from when I tried to hold on to him before falling. He noticed my gaze and quickly pulled his hand back. "Mom, please don't move too much," he said, his voice tightening just slightly. "They said you might have a concussion." He hesitated. "You don't remember what happened, do you?" I shook my head slowly. His relief was visible, almost a smile. "You fell," he said, leaning closer. "You missed a step, that's all." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him as he truly was. There was no warmth in his eyes, only calculation. "Rest," he whispered. "Everything's fine now." When he left the room, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. The nurse came back to check my IV, and I forced my voice to work. "My purse," I said. "Could you bring it to me?" She nodded and left. When she returned, I reached inside, fingers trembling. My recorder wasn't there. For a moment, I thought my heart would stop, but then I remembered. I had synced it to my phone, and my phone had automatic cloud backup. Maybe, just maybe, the file was still out there. That small hope kept me awake through the night. The pain in my ribs was sharp, but the pain in my chest was sharper. The betrayal of a child is unlike any other wound. The next morning, Claire came by. She looked beautiful as always, with her perfect blonde hair and her calm, artificial smile. "Oh, Margaret," she sighed, touching my arm lightly. "You gave us such a scare." Her voice dripped with false concern. "Ethan's been beside himself." I nodded weakly, pretending to be grateful. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know how fragile he is, right? He's been under a lot of pressure. Let's not make things harder for him." Her perfume, something expensive and cloying, made me nauseous. "Of course," I whispered. She smiled. "Good. You're such a good mother." When she left, I finally let the tears fall. Quiet, soundless tears that burned my eyes. He said I fell, but I remembered his hand on my shoulder, the pressure, the push, and I remembered the click of the recorder. Somewhere my truth existed, trapped inside that small device, waiting to be heard. I woke up 3 days later to the sound of the monitor beeping steadily beside me. The morphine haze had lifted, leaving only a dull ache in my chest and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The nurse told me it was Monday. Ethan had gone home for a few hours. She said he'd been so devoted. I smiled faintly. I'd spent my life reading people's faces as a nurse, and I could tell she meant it. He'd fooled her, too. When she left, I stared at the gray morning light filtering through the blinds. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone on the tray table. The screen lit up. No messages from Ethan, no calls, just one new email notification from the cloud storage service. Backup completed successfully. My breath caught. The file existed. I didn't dare open it yet. Not here. The doctor came in, tall, polite, detached. He explained my injuries. 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, bruises down my side. "You're lucky," he said. "A few inches different, and you might not be walking again." I nodded, pretending to listen, but inside his words only replayed one thought. He could have killed me. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived with a bouquet of lilies, my favorites. But now the smell made me sick. He looked exhausted. Or maybe he wanted me to think that. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, his tone wrapped in gentle concern. "I'm better," I said quietly. "It'll take time." He sat beside me, glancing at the nurses passing by, then lowered his voice, almost whispering. "You didn't tell anyone it was my fault, did you?" The question was like a slap. I turned to look at him. His eyes were steady, watching, assessing. "I don't remember much." I lied. He exhaled, relieved. "Good. That's good. Let's not dwell on it. Okay, I'll make sure everything at home is taken care of." I nodded because it was easier than arguing. When he left, I let the silence wash over me. That night, as I stared at the dim ceiling light, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had been begging for his love, his approval, his attention, it just stopped. I realized that no apology, no explanation could make this right. He'd pushed me. My son, the boy I'd raised alone, the boy I'd worked double shifts for, who'd cried on my shoulder when his father died. And now he had tried to erase me. I lay there until dawn, letting the truth settle like cold steel in my chest. The pain wasn't only physical anymore. It was moral, heavy, clarifying. When the nurse came in the next morning, I asked her to bring me a notebook. "I need to write a few things down," I said. She smiled and nodded. That notebook became my lifeline. I started listing everything I'd lost, everything that mattered. The items were simple at first. Trust, my home, my safety. Then, as the list grew, another column appeared on the opposite page. What I still have, the recording, my name, my will. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew I had to do something. On Wednesday, I was discharged. Ethan offered to drive me home, but I declined. "I'll take a taxi," I said. His expression flickered. Something between annoyance and confusion. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. You're still weak. I'll manage." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine. Call me when you get home." I didn't. The house was exactly as I'd left it, except cleaner. Too clean. The banister on the staircase gleamed as if freshly polished, and the carpet where I fell was gone. My purse sat neatly on the kitchen table, emptied. He'd gone through everything. The recorder wasn't there, but I'd stopped expecting it to be. I made tea, sat down, and opened my laptop. The email was still there, the one from the backup service. My fingers trembled as I logged in. The file appeared time-stamped exactly 2 minutes before the fall. I didn't listen to it yet. Just knowing it existed was enough for now. Instead, I opened a new document and wrote one line: "If they ever doubt me, this is my proof." That evening, Ethan called. His voice was warm, rehearsed. "Mom, how's the house?" "You okay? I'm fine," I said. "Good. Listen, Claire and I were talking. Maybe it's time you moved in with us for a while. You know, until you're fully recovered. We could help you. Make sure you're safe." I almost laughed. "That's very kind, but I think I'll stay here." A pause. "Mom, don't be stubborn." "I'm not being stubborn. I just like my own bed." The silence stretched. Then his voice turned sharper, colder. "You always have to make things difficult, don't you?" I didn't answer. "Fine," he said finally. "Do what you want." He hung up. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Truly calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm when you finally understand what's been destroyed. I realized I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not explanations, not forgiveness, not even my silence. That night I deleted his spare key code from the door lock system. Then I sat at the kitchen table staring at the dim reflection of myself in the window. My face looked older than I remembered, but also firmer. There was a line of strength in my jaw that hadn't been there before. I whispered to my reflection, "No more." The next day I called my friend Janine, a retired police dispatcher. She'd always told me if something feels wrong, it probably is. I told her I'd fallen, that I suspected it wasn't an accident. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you have proof?" "Maybe," I said. "A recording, then hold on to it. Don't trust anyone with it yet. Not even the police until you're sure." Her words settled deep in me. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. That evening, I backed up the file to a second cloud drive under a new account. Then wrote everything that had happened minute by minute in my notebook. The facts, the feelings, the moments before and after. I even drew a small diagram of the staircase. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative he'd stolen. When the house grew quiet, I looked up the stairs. My ribs still hurt, but I forced myself to climb one slow step at a time. When I reached the landing, I stood there staring down at the empty space where I had fallen. My hand rested on the railing. "I'm not your victim anymore," I said aloud. The silence answered me. Peaceful. Final. Somewhere behind that silence, the next version of myself began to breathe. 2 days after I came home, I finally gathered the strength to take that first real step. Not physical, but moral. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, the morning sun slicing through the blinds, turning the room into a pattern of light and shadow. My teacup trembled slightly in my hand. Every part of me screamed to stay silent, to let it go, to pretend it never happened. That's what I'd done for most of my life. Make peace, smooth things over, keep the family together. But this wasn't a family argument. This was an assault. At 9:00 a.m., I dialed the Ashton Police Department. My voice was steady, almost clinical. "I need to report a domestic incident," I said. My son pushed me down the stairs. The officer on the other end sighed softly, not out of cruelty, but habit. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger right now?" "No." "Was there anyone else present during the incident?" "No." "Do you have any witnesses?" I hesitated. "I have a recording." That caught his attention. "Audio or video audio. It might have captured what happened before the fall." "All right. Bring it in and we'll take a look." When I arrived at the station later that day, the young officer at the front desk looked me up and down, gray cardigan sling on my arm, the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. I handed over my ID, explained my case again, word for word. He nodded politely, typing notes into the computer. After 20 minutes, a detective named Harris called me into his office. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with the weary patience of someone who had seen too many family tragedies. "Mrs. Lewis," he said kindly, "I understand this is difficult, but do you have reason to believe your son intended to harm you?" "I don't believe," I said, my voice trembling just slightly. "I know." He leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "We get a lot of family disputes that turn into misunderstandings. Falls accidents, tensions run high." "Is it possible?" "No," I interrupted, surprising even myself. "It wasn't an accident." He was angry. We argued and he pushed me. He studied me carefully, then asked, "Where's the recording?" I handed him my phone. He connected it to his computer, scrolled through the files. The one labeled Kitchen March 18 was there, but when he clicked it, the file showed as corrupted. My stomach dropped. "I backed it up," I said quickly. "In the cloud. Do you have access to it now?" "Yes, but I'd rather not play it here." He sighed again, softer this time. "All right, Mrs. Lewis. I'll give you my card. When you're ready, bring it in. Or if you'd like, we can send an officer to your home to help retrieve it." I hesitated. Something about his tone calm procedural made me realize how easily my case could disappear into a drawer labeled domestic confusion. "Thank you," I said, taking the card. "I'll handle it myself." When I stepped outside, the cold March air hit me like a slap. For the first time since the fall, I felt small. Not physically, but in the way society makes older women invisible. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, thinking of how easily Ethan's story could become the only one that mattered. That evening, I called Janine again. "They didn't believe me," I said flatly. "They rarely do," she answered. "But don't give up. Find another way." "Another way? You said he had cameras in the house, right?" "Security ones." I froze. Of course. Ethan had installed cameras last year for safety. One by the front door, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway near the stairs. I'd never thought much about them. He was obsessed with control, always needing to watch over things. After we hung up, I went online searching through his old emails on the shared home computer. The login info for the camera system was still saved. My heart pounded as I opened the portal. The page loaded slowly, then filled with small squares of frozen footage. The last saved date was March 17th, the night before my fall. Everything after that was deleted. Deleted, but not gone. I scrolled through the technical settings and saw a faint line of text. "Backup stored on secondary drive." My breath caught. I clicked, but the screen asked for a password. I tried Ethan123. Denied. Claire. Denied. Then, almost laughing, I typed in Margaret. The page opened. The folder contained dozens of clips. Most were harmless. Me in the kitchen cleaning, reading, feeding the cat. But one file time-stamped March 18th, 3:17 p.m., matched the moment I fell. I clicked play. The footage was grainy black and white. I could see us both near the top of the stairs, Ethan's figure looming close, his hand raised. Not in a shove, not yet, but in that hovering, dangerous way. The audio was faint, but my own voice was clear enough. "Ethan, please calm down." Then static. The fall wasn't visible. The video cut off exactly at the moment of impact, but it was something, enough to prove I hadn't imagined it. I copied the file to a flash drive and hid it inside an old recipe box labeled Christmas cookies. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I sat by the fireplace and listened to the audio recording again. I'd restored it from the cloud. Ethan's voice was unmistakable. "You really should rest more, Mom. You're tired. Sometimes you get confused." Then a pause, a rustle my startled breath, his final words before the fall. "Don't make me do this." Tears slid down my cheeks, silent, involuntary. I closed my eyes and pressed the flash drive to my chest like a talisman. I realized then that this wasn't only about survival anymore. It was about truth. Mine and all the others like me whose voices got dismissed because they were emotional, fragile, confused. The next morning I called a lawyer. His name was Robert Geller, a small-town attorney with a tired voice but sharp instincts. I told him everything carefully, calmly, as if reading a patient chart. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Mrs. Lewis," he said finally, "what you're describing is serious. If you have those recordings, we can do something, but I need to warn you. It'll be ugly. Family cases always are. I've lived through worse, I said. He agreed to meet me the next day. That night I locked every door shut, every window, and sat at the kitchen table again, notebook open. For the first time, the list I wrote wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what I planned to do next. Secure all evidence. Tell no one. Wait. Watch. Prepare. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the game had shifted. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, I paused halfway up, looking down at the empty hallway. My ribs still ached, but my steps were steady. The fear was still there, but underneath it something new had taken root. Resolve. The morning I met Robert Geller, the sky hung low and gray, pressing against the windows of his small office like wet paper. The place smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. He was exactly as I imagined him, mid-60s white shirt, slightly wrinkled eyes, sharp but kind. He listened as I told my story again. This time I didn't tremble. I spoke slowly, clearly, as though I were presenting a medical report. He took notes, occasionally glancing at the sling on my arm. "Do you have the files?" he asked. "Yes," I said, pulling the flash drive from my purse. Video and audio both backed up. He inserted it into his computer. For a long moment, the room was filled only with the hum of the old desktop. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Lewis, this is strong. It's not perfect." It cuts off before the fall, but his words are incriminating. "Combined with your injuries, it's enough to request an investigation." I felt my throat tighten. "So they'll believe me." He gave a small, tired smile. "They'll have to start listening." He promised to contact the district attorney's office that week. I left his office lighter than I'd felt in months. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something colder, steadier, like standing on firm ground again after being underwater too long. That evening I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Rain streaked the glass. Across the street, the Peterson kids were building a snowman out of the slush. I wondered when life had stopped being ordinary, when my own son had become the danger. The phone rang. "Ethan." I didn't answer. 2 minutes later a message came through. "Mom, I know you've been talking to people. Don't do anything stupid. You're not thinking clearly." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I turned the phone face down and exhaled. He knew somehow. He knew. The next morning, Claire showed up at my doorstep holding a paper bag of groceries. Her lipstick was perfect, as always. "Ethan said you weren't answering," she said sweetly. "We were worried." I forced a smile. "That's kind of you." She stepped inside without waiting for permission. I brought soup, homemade. The smell of rosemary filled the air, masking something sharper. Her perfume. Expensive and suffocating. She moved around the kitchen like she owned it, setting out bowls, chatting about nothing. The weather, her job, how stressful things had been. Then, as she ladled soup into the bowls, her tone changed. "Ethan says you've been talking to some lawyer. That's unnecessary, don't you think?" I froze spoon halfway to my mouth. "I'm just getting advice." "Advice," she repeated, smiling thinly. "From whom? Someone who knows the law." She sighed softly, shaking her head as if disappointed. "Margaret, listen to me. Ethan's upset. He thinks you're trying to ruin him. You know how sensitive he is. If this gets out, his career..." "His career," I interrupted. "He tried to kill me." Her eyes flickered just for a second, but then the mask returned. "You fell," she said calmly. "We were both there afterward. You were confused. You don't remember. I remember enough." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you press this, it won't end well for anyone. Not for you, not for Ethan. You'll lose what little family you have left." I looked at her for a long time. Then I smiled. Small, tired, deliberate. "Thank you for the soup." She blinked, thrown off by my calmness. Then she stood adjusting her coat. "Think carefully, Margaret. Sometimes it's better to forgive." When the door closed behind her, I locked it. Then I carried the soup straight to the sink and poured it down the drain. That night I wrote everything down. The visit, her words, her tone. Every manipulation was another piece of evidence. 2 days later, Robert called. "They're reviewing the materials. We might get a hearing scheduled. Don't tell anyone yet." "I won't." But someone must have talked, because the next day I found my front door slightly ajar when I came home from the pharmacy. Nothing was missing, just disturbed. Drawers opened, papers moved, a faint smell of Ethan's cologne in the hallway. I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding. Then I walked upstairs to the landing, the place where it happened, and whispered, "Not again." The fear that had once paralyzed me now sharpened into focus. I called Janine. "They've been here." She didn't hesitate. "Then you're getting close. Keep everything double-backed. Store one copy somewhere they'll never think to look." That night I hid another flash drive inside the old sewing machine in the attic. Then I backed up everything to an encrypted drive under a fake name. Every click of the mouse felt like a small act of rebellion. By Friday, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I decided to confront Ethan directly, not to argue, but to watch his face to see the cracks. He came to the house that evening, his tone falsely casual. "Mom, can we just talk about what about you making a fool of yourself?" I crossed my arms. "I'm not the one lying." His smile faltered. "What are you hoping to get out of this money sympathy? You've always been dramatic." "Justice," I said simply. Something in his eyes darkened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're not well, Mom. If you keep doing this, people will start asking questions about your memory, your sanity. Maybe you should check yourself back into the hospital before you hurt yourself again." I stared at him, unflinching. "You should leave now." He laughed softly. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I don't need them to believe me," I said. "I just need them to hear you." For a second he froze. Then realization flickered across his face. The recording. His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. I stepped back. "Get out." He left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. When the sound faded, I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up to him. Over the next few days, I did nothing. I read, cooked, walked slowly through the house, rested. I told myself it was recovery, but really it was preparation. Robert called again on Monday. "The DA's office wants more time. They'll need to verify the recordings." "That's fine," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, flat, almost detached. When we hung up, I turned off my phone and sat quietly in the living room. The house was still the kind of stillness that used to make me uneasy. Now it felt earned. For the first time since the fall, I allowed myself to breathe. I made a pot of tea, curled up on the couch, and watched the rain return. My body still hurt, but inside something had healed. The fear had been replaced by clarity. They thought I was weak. They mistook silence for surrender. But silence, I realized, was just the pause before the next move. The days after Ethan's visit stretched like glass, fragile, transparent, one wrong move away from shattering. I went about my routines quietly, deliberately. Morning tea, a short walk to the mailbox, watering the plants. Normal things, grounding things. On the surface, I was the same woman I'd always been, soft-voiced, polite, predictable. But underneath that stillness, my mind moved with the precision of a scalpel. Robert had filed the preliminary report, but the process was slow. Too slow. Bureaucracy, he said. Verification signatures waiting for someone somewhere to care enough to act. I told him I understood. I didn't tell him I was preparing my own parallel path. One Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I froze. Through the peephole, I saw Claire again, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, a gentle smile plastered across her face. I considered not answering, but she saw me through the frosted glass and waved cheerfully. I opened the door just enough to block her from stepping inside. "What do you need, Claire?" She sighed dramatically. "Margaret, please don't be like this. I just want to talk. I think we said everything we needed to." She tilted her head, her voice softening. "Ethan's worried sick about you. He's been having panic attacks, can barely sleep. He said you threatened him with something, a recording." "That can't be true, right?" Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were needles. I didn't flinch. "I don't discuss private matters." She smiled wider. "Oh, Margaret, you know how gossip spreads in small towns. It would be such a shame if people started thinking you're losing your memory. You've been through so much trauma. Sometimes the mind confuses things." I looked at her face carefully, memorizing every polished word, every carefully measured breath. "Thank you for your concern." I said, my voice calm, but my memory is just fine. She studied me, and for the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across her expression. Then she forced a little laugh. "You've always been such a strong woman. I admire that." When she realized I wasn't inviting her in, she shifted tactics. "Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? Just us. Ethan wants to apologize. He's not himself lately." "No. Excuse me, I won't be coming." A pause. Her voice sharpened. "You're making this worse than it needs to be." "Then maybe it needs to be worse," I replied and closed the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to the faint sound of her heels clicking down the path. The shaking in my hands subsided quickly this time. The fear that used to follow their visits had turned into something else. Resolve, calm, even a strange kind of pity. That night I went through every folder, every drive. I labeled and dated each piece of evidence, audio, video, text messages, photos of my injuries, copies of medical reports. I made notes of every conversation since the fall, every call, every visit. My handwriting was neat, precise, almost clinical. Then I opened a new file on my computer. Timeline: March 18th incident, March 20th hospital discharge, March 23rd first call to police, March 25th Claire's visit. As I filled the list, something clicked. For the first time, I saw the pattern, their rhythm of control. Every time I took a step forward, they appeared, smiling, offering peace, asking for forgiveness, trying to rewrite the story. And every time I'd stepped back in fear. Until now. The next day, I visited a local print shop and had all the evidence duplicated and printed. Dates, screenshots, transcripts. The young clerk didn't ask questions. He just handed me a stack of papers thick enough to fill a binder. I labeled it Lewis Case. When I came home, there was a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no address, just one sheet of paper folded in half. We can make this go away. Stop talking to lawyers. Stop spreading lies. You're not well. You'll regret this. No signature, but the handwriting. I'd recognize Ethan's anywhere. I sat down at the table, unfolded the note again, and read it slowly. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't rise. I simply reached for my notebook and added another entry. March 26th, anonymous threat, handwriting, E.L. Then I took a photo of it and uploaded it with the rest. That evening I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done since before the fall, and watched the sunset turn the clouds a dull red. It was almost peaceful. A few hours later, the phone rang again. This time I answered. Mom. Ethan's voice came through soft and almost pleading. Can we please stop this? I know you're angry, but this is getting out of hand. Claire told me you've been collecting things, talking to people. You're making a mistake. I said nothing. He continued, his voice trembling now. You don't understand. People will think you're crazy. They'll think you attacked me. Please, let's meet and talk. No, Ethan. Mom, please. You're ruining everything. There was a long silence. Then I said quietly, You already did. He hung up. After the call, I sat for a while staring at the darkened window. My reflection looked different now, sharper, more alive. I wasn't naive enough to think I was safe, but I finally understood something vital. They were afraid. Not of me as a person, but of the truth I held. The next morning I went to the community center. There was a flyer on the board, Support Group for Victims of Family Abuse, Tuesdays at 6. I tore off one of the tabs. Not because I wanted sympathy, but because I needed allies. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months. No nightmares, no shadows on the stairs, just the soft rhythmic sound of rain on the roof. When I woke, I made breakfast, fed the cat, and checked my emails. One from Robert. Meeting with DA scheduled. Prepare your statement. I exhaled slowly. The time for waiting was over. Still, I could feel the weight of what was coming. The confrontation, the exposure, the war beneath the polite words. But I was ready. I looked out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind, and whispered to myself, They can tempt me all they want, but I'm done playing nice. And for the first time, I actually believed it. The community center was smaller than I expected. An old brick building tucked between a laundromat and a church. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly and the air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon disinfectant. A whiteboard stood near the entrance with blue marker letters, Women's Support Circle, Tuesday 6 p.m. For a moment I hesitated. I'd spent my life helping others heal. Patients, neighbors, even Ethan when he scraped his knees as a boy. I didn't know how to ask for help myself, but something pushed me forward. I needed to speak. Inside, a handful of women sat in a loose circle of folding chairs. Their faces were kind but weary. The faces of people who'd seen too much and survived anyway. A woman in her 60s with a calm, teacherly voice introduced herself as Ruth, the facilitator. You can just listen if you'd like. No pressure to share. I nodded and sat down. As the meeting began, one by one the women spoke. Stories unfolded like wounds reopening. Husbands who controlled their money partners, who isolated them. Sons who turned violent. Each voice cracked, but none broke. They weren't fragile. They were warriors in plain clothes. When it was my turn, I didn't plan to speak, but the words rose up on their own. "My son pushed me down the stairs," I said simply. A few heads turned, some nodded. "He told everyone I fell, and for a while I almost believed him." The room was silent. Then Ruth said gently, "You don't have to doubt yourself anymore. What happened to you was real." Something inside me shifted like a window opening after a long winter. I felt air in my lungs again. "I recorded him," I added quietly. "Before it happened, he didn't know." One of the younger women, maybe in her 30s, leaned forward. "Keep that safe," she said. "That's your power." For the first time since the fall, I didn't feel alone. After the meeting, Ruth handed me her number. "If they come around again," she said softly, "call me before you do anything rash." "Promise," I said. The following week I returned. The more I listened, the stronger I felt. There was something sacred about the honesty in that room. No one wore masks. No one smiled to hide the pain. Each confession built a kind of invisible bridge between us. We were all different women, but bound by one truth. We had been silenced before, and we wouldn't be again. Then one afternoon the silence broke at home. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. My stomach tightened. Through the window I saw Ethan and Claire standing side by side. He held a bouquet of white roses. She clutched a casserole dish like a prop in a play. I opened the door only slightly. "What do you want?" Ethan's smile was soft practiced. "Mom, we came to make peace. We're family. Can we come in?" I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. But then I thought, let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. I stepped aside. 5 minutes. They entered like guests at a funeral. Claire placed the casserole on the counter, eyes scanning the room as if searching for evidence of my rebellion. Ethan sat across from me at the table, his voice trembling with forced sincerity. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I shouldn't have yelled that day. Things got out of hand." "That's one way to describe attempted murder," I said evenly. He flinched. "Don't say that. You'll destroy me. You did that yourself." Claire touched his arm. "Margaret, please. We all said things we didn't mean. Let's just forget the past." I laughed softly. "Forget? You mean pretend." Her lips tightened. "You've changed," she said, her voice low. "I had to," I replied. Ethan leaned forward. "Mom, we're giving you a chance. Take it. Stop this nonsense before it ruins everything." I stood. "You should go." Claire rose too, her tone turning sharp. "You're going to regret this. You'll end up alone." "I already am," I said. "And I've never been freer." They stared at me, stunned by the quiet finality in my voice. Then Ethan slammed his fist on the table, sending a cup crashing to the floor. "You think you're stronger than me?" I met his eyes. "No, just smarter." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. He picked up his coat and stormed toward the door, Claire trailing behind. At the threshold, she turned and said coldly, "You'll beg for us back one day." "Don't hold your breath," I said. When the door closed, my legs trembled, but I stayed standing until I heard their car pull away. Only then did I sink into the chair, heart pounding. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the ticking of the old clock. And then unexpectedly, I smiled. They had come not to reconcile, but to test me to see if I'd break. Instead, they'd shown their true faces, and I had stayed calm. That night, I called Ruth. "They came," I said. She exhaled slowly, and I told them to leave. "Good," she said. "That's the first real victory. Remember, control is what they crave. Deny it, and they crumble." Her words echoed in my head long after we hung up. The next day, I printed the photos from the security footage and added them to the binder. Then I scanned the latest threat note, filed it under Exhibit 7. Every detail mattered now. When I returned to the support group that week, Ruth smiled when she saw me. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," I admitted. Another woman nodded. "You stop being afraid once you realize they can't touch you anymore." I knew she was right. Fear doesn't vanish. It just loses its power. That evening back home, I lit a candle on the kitchen table and sat in silence. The house no longer felt haunted. The shadows were still there, but they belonged to me now. For the first time in months, I didn't jump at every sound. I didn't double-check the locks 3 times. I knew they would try again. Anger like theirs doesn't die easily, but I was ready. When I went upstairs, I paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the place where it all began. The wood gleamed in the candlelight, smooth and harmless. "Now they'll come back," I whispered. "But so will I." And as I turned off the light, I realized something. The fear that had once broken me had become my armor. The day the truth came out started quietly like any other. The sky was pale, almost colorless, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. I woke before dawn, made tea, and sat by the window with the binder open on the table. Every page, every printed line was a piece of my survival story. Evidence facts my reality, no longer theirs to twist. At 9:00, Robert called. "The district attorney has agreed to review the case," he said. "They want to see the evidence in person." For a moment I couldn't speak, months of tension compressed into that single sentence. When I finally asked, "Today, 2 p.m., can you bring everything?" "Yes." I hung up, feeling an odd stillness settle over me. Not relief, not fear, just readiness. I gathered the binder, the flash drives, the photos, and tucked them into a plain black briefcase. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back had steel in her eyes. At the courthouse, the meeting room was sterile. White walls, metal chairs, a faint smell of old coffee. The assistant district attorney, a woman in her 40s with sharp glasses and sharper eyes, greeted us briskly. "Mrs. Lewis, Mr. Geller, let's begin." I opened the binder and began to speak slowly, calmly, every word deliberate. I told them everything. The argument, the push, the lies, the threats. I played the recording, Ethan's voice filling the room. "You really should rest more, Mom. Sometimes you get confused. Don't make me do this." The air seemed to freeze around us. Then I showed them the security footage, the flicker of his hand, the angle of his body, my startled step backward. The sound of my gasp before the feed cut to static. The room went utterly still. When the screen went black, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, the ADA said, "We'll need to verify these files, but this is substantial." Robert leaned back, exhaling softly. "Told you she wasn't confused." When it was over, they promised to open an official inquiry. I walked out of the building into the pale afternoon sunlight. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Adrenaline, maybe, or power. The quiet kind that comes when you've been silenced too long and finally hear your own voice again. But the silence didn't last. That evening around 6, my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, notifications. Ethan's name flashed across the screen again and again. I ignored them all. Then a text came from an unknown number. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you've started." 5 minutes later, headlights swept across my driveway. I froze. Through the window, I saw Ethan's car. He got out, slamming the door, and Claire followed, her face pale tight with fury. I didn't move. I let them pound on the door. The knocking grew louder, angrier. "Mom," Ethan shouted, "open up! You can't hide from this!" I turned on the porch light but didn't unlock the door. "Go home," I said through the glass. My voice was calm, almost gentle. He laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "You called the cops on your own son." "Are you insane?" Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "You're destroying our lives. You'll be in a nursing home before this is over." "Maybe," I said, "but the truth will still be out there." Ethan's face twisted. "You think anyone cares about your truth? You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand being alone." The words hit me like bullets. But they didn't pierce. They just fell flat. I'd heard worse from him in smaller, crueler ways over years of small betrayals and disappointments. I met his eyes through the glass. "You should leave before the neighbors call the police. I already told them to watch out for you." For a second, something flickered in his expression. Fear. Then anger replaced it. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You'll see." He slammed his hand against the glass hard enough to make it rattle. Claire grabbed his arm. "Ethan, stop," she hissed. "This is what she wants. She's recording you." She was right. I was. My phone sat on the counter camera, pointed straight at them through the window. When he realized, his face changed again. Panic, disbelief. Then he turned and stormed back to the car, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed down the street. The tires screeched as they sped off into the night. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, then turned off the camera and exhaled. The calm returned slowly, like settling dust. The next morning, I emailed the video to Robert and to the ADA. Subject: follow-up evidence. No explanation, no emotion, just the facts. Later that day, the police called. They wanted to speak to me in person. When they arrived, 2 officers stood in my living room, polite professional. One of them, Officer Ramirez, said, "We've received the footage and statements. There will likely be a warrant issued for your son's questioning. Do you have somewhere you can stay in the meantime?" I nodded. "I'll manage." After they left, the house felt quiet again. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was mine. Every creak of the floorboard, every gust of wind against the window pane, it was home again. That evening, I attended the support group. When I told them what had happened, the room erupted in quiet applause. Ruth smiled. "You did it," she said softly. "I'm not sure it's over yet," I replied. "It doesn't have to be over to be victory," she said. "Sometimes winning just means surviving with your truth intact." On the drive home, the streetlights blurred through the rain. I thought of Ethan, my boy, who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard, who used to beg me not to leave when he was scared at night. Somewhere along the way, he had become someone else, someone I couldn't recognize. But that night I didn't cry. I'd already mourned the son I lost long before this day. When I got home, I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. I wrote only one sentence. "He said I fell, but now the world knows he pushed." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the sound wash over me. There was no triumph in me, no joy, just a deep, quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The court date came faster than I expected, though the weeks leading up to it blurred into one long stretch of restless nights and quiet mornings. I stopped expecting peace. Justice, I learned, isn't peaceful. It's sharp, procedural, and slow, but it cuts clean when it finally lands. The courthouse was packed the morning the hearing began. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and nerves. I sat beside Robert at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped around a pen that I never used. Across the room sat Ethan and Claire, their lawyer, whispering furiously between them. Ethan looked smaller, somehow paler. His once perfect composure had cracked. Claire's eyes darted everywhere but at me. The judge entered. A woman with gray hair pulled tightly back. "Case number 3478, State of Ohio versus Ethan Lewis," she read. The sound of my son's name in that context felt surreal, like hearing a eulogy at the wrong funeral. The prosecution began with the evidence, my photos, my medical records, the staircase measurements. Then came the audio file. When Ethan's voice filled the courtroom, "Don't make me do this," there was a visible shift. Even the clerk stopped typing for a second. Ethan stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Claire glanced at him, then at me, then looked down. Next came the footage. Grainy black and white, but clear enough. My body near the railing, his hand reaching out. The sound of my startled gasp before the feed cut to static. The room went utterly still. When it ended, Robert rose. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lewis recorded that file 2 minutes before she was found unconscious at the base of her stairs. Her injuries align with the trajectory of a fall caused by external force. The defendant's actions were deliberate, not accidental." The defense lawyer stood, his tone clipped. "Your Honor, the video doesn't show an actual push. It's circumstantial. Mr. Lewis was attempting to help his mother, not harm her. She was confused, emotional, recovering from prior health issues. I felt my pulse spike, but kept my expression neutral. I'd heard those same words before. Confused, emotional, fragile. They'd used them to dismiss me, to silence me. Not anymore." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Lewis, would you like to make a statement?" I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. My ribs still ached, sometimes a phantom reminder of that day. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom blurred for a moment, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "My son says I fell, but I remember his hand. I remember the look in his eyes. I remember thinking, this is how I end. I survived because something inside me refused to believe his story, because for once I didn't choose silence." I paused, looking at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't come here for revenge," I continued. "I came here so he can't do this again. To me, to anyone." When I sat down, the judge nodded once. "Thank you, Mrs. Lewis." The hearing lasted hours, but when the verdict came, it felt like no time had passed at all. Guilty on the count of aggravated assault resulting in serious bodily harm. Probation denied. Sentence 5 years. Ethan's mouth fell open. Claire gasped quietly. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a vast echoing quiet inside me, like the sound after thunder. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, their voices sharp with questions. "Mrs. Lewis, how does it feel to see your son convicted?" I stopped, looked at the crowd, and said softly, "It feels like the truth finally spoke for itself." Then I walked past them. That night, the house felt too large. I sat in the dark living room, the silence pressing against me. Justice doesn't bring comfort. It just stops the bleeding. The wounds remain, but at least they're clean. A week later, Claire called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice was small, brittle. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm not," I replied. "But I'm free." She exhaled shakily. "Everything's gone. His job, our savings, the house. They're seizing assets to pay legal fees." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, though not for the reason she thought. "You ruined us." "No," I said quietly. "He did." She hung up. I sat there listening to the dial tone, thinking about how easily destruction spreads, how one act of cruelty ripples outward until it devours everything in its path. The days that followed were strangely calm. The world kept turning. The sun rose. People went to work. Neighbors waved. Life went on, indifferent and unstoppable. I met with Robert one final time. "The case is closed," he said. "You can move on now, Mrs. Lewis." Move on. 2 words that sound simple until you try to live them. I walked home alone. Leaves crunched under my shoes. For the first time in months, I didn't look over my shoulder. I wasn't afraid of footsteps behind me. That night, I opened my notebook for the last time. The pages were full. Dates, names, evidence, pain. I turned to the final page and wrote, "Case closed." He said I fell. I stood back up. Then I closed it, placed it in a box, and slid it into the back of the closet. Not to forget, but to rest. In the morning, I went to the window. The light was different now, cleaner, gentler. I watched the street wake up. The mailman, the kids biking to school, the neighbor's dog barking at the garbage truck. Ordinary life. My ribs still ached when I breathed too deeply. Scars don't vanish. They just stop bleeding. When the phone rang later, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to explain. The woman I used to be, the one who apologized for everything, who made excuses for everyone, she was gone. What replaced her wasn't bitter or angry or vengeful. She was simply awake. That night, as I turned off the lights, I looked once more at the staircase. The wood gleamed softly in the lamplight. I traced my fingers over the railing, feeling the faint grooves in the grain. "It's over," I whispered. But I didn't mean the pain. I meant the silence. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't that he was punished. It was that I was believed. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. It's been 8 months since the trial ended. I've stopped marking time by court dates and phone calls. Now my life is measured in smaller things. The smell of coffee at sunrise. The sound of rain on my porch roof. The quiet joy of ordinary mornings. I sold the old house in Ashton not long after Ethan's sentencing. Too many ghosts in those walls. Too many memories soaked into the wood. The realtor asked if I wanted to fix the stair railing before the sale. I told her, no, let it stand as it is. Some things aren't meant to be erased. Now I live in a small town near Lake Erie, in a cottage with blue shutters and an overgrown garden that I'm slowly learning to care for. The property cost $320,000. Less than my old home, but it's mine alone with no painful memories attached. I volunteer twice a week at a local shelter for women, many of them like me, quiet survivors of the people who were supposed to love them most. They call me Miss Margaret there. The younger ones, with their bruised voices and shaking hands, often ask, "Does it ever stop hurting?" And I tell them the truth. Not completely, but the pain changes shape. It stops owning you. Sometimes when the wind blows hard off the lake, I sit on the porch wrapped in a blanket and think about the past. Not out of sadness, but as a way to remind myself what I walked through. Memory isn't a wound anymore. It's a scar I've made peace with. I still get updates about Ethan, though I never ask for them. Small-town news travels even across counties. Word is he's serving time quietly. His lawyer tried to appeal twice, both denied. Claire filed for divorce in the spring. Last I heard, she moved back to her parents in Cincinnati, working part-time, broke and bitter. I don't hate her. I don't hate either of them. Hatred takes energy, and I've learned to save mine for better things, but I won't pretend to feel pity either. They built their own ruin. One afternoon in June, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Ethan's. The sight of it made my stomach tighten, though not in fear. I waited 3 days before opening it. It was short. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I think about what happened every day. I don't remember who I was that day. I only remember the sound of you hitting the stairs. I see it every night. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my drawer. Not to cherish, not to respond, but to keep as proof that even monsters can wake up to their own reflection. Forgiveness isn't something I owe him. It's something I owe myself. In time, maybe, but not yet. The world doesn't offer neat endings. Justice doesn't erase the ache of what was lost. My son will never be the boy who brought me dandelions again. That's gone forever. But the woman who survived him, she's someone I've come to admire. Every Tuesday evening I still go to the support group. Ruth runs it same as before. She always smiles when she sees me. You look lighter, she says. I am, I tell her. Not happy maybe, but free. Sometimes after the meetings I stay behind to clean up the coffee cups and fold the chairs. One night a young woman named Elise came up to me, her eyes swollen from crying. I don't think I can do it, she whispered. He'll destroy me. I touched her arm gently. You can. I thought I couldn't too, but one day you'll stop shaking. You'll speak, and they'll have to listen. She nodded, tears spilling again, and I saw in her face a reflection of who I'd been not so long ago. Terrified, ashamed, yet ready to rise. When I drive home from those meetings, I sometimes catch myself humming softly to the radio, something I haven't done in years. It feels strange, like rediscovering a small piece of an old self I thought was gone forever. Life here is simple. My mornings are quiet. My evenings are peaceful. I've planted wild flowers along the edge of the yard, and they've begun to bloom. Bright, untamed things that grow wherever they please. Every time I see them, I think we share the same stubbornness. One night in late August, I stood outside watching lightning flash over the lake. The storm rolled in fast wind, whipping through the trees. For a moment, I thought of the sound of my body hitting the stairs, the smell of fear, the weight of disbelief. Then, as thunder cracked, the memory dissolved into the wind. That chapter is over. I went back inside, made tea, and sat at my kitchen table. My binder, the old case file, still sat on the shelf behind me. I hadn't opened it in months, but knowing it was there gave me comfort. Proof if I ever needed it again that I hadn't imagined any of it. Before bed, I wrote one last note in my new journal. The handwriting was steadier than it had been a year ago. Freedom isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the sound of your own breath without fear. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor. The kettle whistled softly. I stood by the window sipping my tea, watching the world go on. Somewhere out there, Ethan was waking up in a concrete cell. Claire was probably scrolling through job listings, wondering how her life unraveled. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't wish them well either. Some fates you earn one quiet, cruel choice at a time. As for me, my life is small now, but it's mine. Every morning I wake up and think you survived your own family. You can survive anything. I still carry the faint scar along my arm where the bone broke. I used to hate it. Now I touch it sometimes like a reminder, a proof of life. They said I fell down the stairs, but the truth climbed back up. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I expected it to be Ruth or maybe Janine, but the caller ID showed Lakeside Community Center. I answered, curious. Margaret, the director of the center, a woman named Sharon, whom I'd met at several fundraisers. I'm putting together a workshop on financial safety for seniors. Would you be interested in speaking? We need someone who understands what financial exploitation looks like from the inside. The request caught me off guard. I'd never thought of myself as someone with wisdom to share. Just a woman who'd survived. But wasn't that exactly the point I agreed without hesitation? That decision marked the beginning of something unexpected. The workshop was scheduled for the following month, a small affair in the community center's main room. I spent weeks preparing, organizing my thoughts, researching statistics about elder abuse. The numbers shocked even me. 1 in 10 adults over 60 experiences some form of elder abuse. Financial exploitation costs seniors billions every year, and family members are the most common perpetrators. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit I hadn't worn since retirement. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened my pearl earrings. Not from fear, but from a strange sense of purpose. I'd worked 40 years as a nurse helping others heal their bodies. Now I would try to help heal a different kind of wound. The community center was more crowded than I expected. 30, maybe 40 people filled the folding chairs, mostly women my age or older, but a few younger faces sprinkled throughout. Some clutched notebooks, others just listened with wary eyes. Sharon introduced me briefly, and then the room fell silent, waiting. I stepped to the podium, cleared my throat, and began where all true stories must at the beginning. The first time money disappeared from my account, I told myself it was a bank error. The second time I wondered if I was becoming forgetful. By the third time I knew someone was taking it, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it was my son. The room stayed silent, but I felt the collective intake of breath. This was familiar territory for many. I continued detailing the gradual escalation, the subtle gaslighting, the way Ethan had slowly convinced me to doubt my own mind before he ever laid a hand on me. The physical violence was just the culmination of a pattern that had been building for years. Financial abuse almost always precedes physical abuse. They isolate you, control your resources, then convince you that you need them more than they need you. I explained the warning signs, the protection strategies, the importance of keeping separate accounts and passwords. I showed them how to check credit reports, how to set up alerts for unusual transactions, how to legally protect assets with trusts. But most importantly, I spoke about the shame, that heavy silence that keeps us from seeking help. The reluctance to admit your own child is stealing from you. The fear of being seen as a burden, a fool or worse, crazy. Shame thrives in isolation, I told them. Break the silence and shame starts to lose its power. When I finished, the questions came hesitantly at first, then in a flood. How did I find the courage to report my son? What resources helped most? How did I rebuild afterward? I answered each one honestly without embellishment. These women didn't need inspiration. They needed practical tools for survival. As the session wrapped up, several came forward to speak privately, sharing whispered fragments of their own stories. I recognized the look in their eyes, that mixture of fear and determination, the first stirrings of reclaimed dignity. Sharon approached as the last attendees filtered out. That was extraordinary, Margaret. Would you consider making this a regular thing? Maybe monthly? I hesitated only briefly before nodding. My nursing career had taught me that healing often comes through helping others heal. Perhaps this was the work I was meant to do in this new chapter. News of the workshop spread through the county's senior centers. The next session drew nearly 60 people, men as well this time. I expanded the material, invited a local attorney to discuss power of attorney documents, brought in a police officer to explain reporting procedures. By the third month, a reporter from the Lakeside Gazette attended. The resulting article, Retired Nurse Leads Fight Against Elder Abuse, ran on the front page of the local section. My phone began ringing with calls from neighboring towns, invitations to speak at other centers. I was no longer just Margaret Lewis' survivor. I was becoming an advocate, a voice for those still trapped in silence. On a crisp October morning, I received an unexpected email from a state senator's office. The senator had read about my workshops and was drafting legislation to strengthen protections against elder abuse. Would I be willing to consult and potentially testify before the State Judiciary Committee? The opportunity to help shape actual policy made my hands shake with a mix of nervousness and fierce joy. I remembered standing in that courtroom telling my story to people who initially doubted me. Now I would speak for all the others who still couldn't speak for themselves. The preparation consumed me for weeks. I worked with the senator's staff to understand the legal frameworks, the gaps in existing protections, the challenges of enforcement. I gathered testimonies from women in my support group who were willing to share their experiences anonymously. The day of the hearing arrived cold and bright. The state capitol building loomed imposing in the morning light, its stone columns and broad steps designed to make ordinary citizens feel small. But I wasn't small anymore. I carried with me the collective strength of every person who had trusted me with their story. The hearing room was formal wood-paneled, with legislators seated in a semicircle facing the witness table. Television cameras lined the back wall. As I took my seat and adjusted the microphone, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished table. Gray hair, neatly styled posture, straight eyes, clear and focused. I barely recognized myself. I testified for nearly an hour, laying out the realities of elder abuse in clinical measured terms. I explained how abusers isolate their victims, how financial control precedes physical violence, how shame and family loyalty keep victims silent. I detailed the barriers to reporting: fear of retaliation, fear of not being believed, fear of having nowhere to go. When I finished my prepared statement, the committee chair leaned forward. "Mrs. Lewis, you speak with such clarity on this issue. May I ask what brought you to this work?" The room went quiet. I had not planned to share my personal story here, but looking at their faces, some attentive, others merely polite, I knew that statistics alone wouldn't move them to action. They needed to see the human cost. 3 years ago, my son pushed me down a flight of stairs after I questioned him about money he'd taken from my accounts. He then convinced medical personnel, police, and initially even me that I had fallen accidentally. If I hadn't secretly recorded our interaction just before the assault, he would have succeeded in making me doubt my own reality. I paused, watching their expressions shift. The youngest senator's hand had moved unconsciously to cover her mouth. An older man removed his glasses, blinking rapidly. This isn't about one bad son or one vulnerable mother. This is about power and how easily it can be abused when we fail to protect our most vulnerable citizens. The legislation you're considering today won't just change laws, it will save lives. The bill passed committee unanimously 3 weeks later, moving to the full Senate for consideration. When the local news covered the story, they used a photo of me at the witness table, my spine straight, my gaze direct. The caption read, "Survivor turns testimony into action." Ruth called immediately after seeing the broadcast. "Margaret Lewis, state advocate." Who would have thought? I laughed, still a little amazed myself. Not me, certainly. Not a year ago. But sometimes the path forward only reveals itself when you stop looking back. The advocacy work expanded gradually, filling my days with purpose. I established a small nonprofit organization with Ruth and 2 other women from the support group. We called it Second Story, a nod to both new beginnings and the staircase that had changed my life. With my retirement savings and the proceeds from my house sale, I had enough to fund our initial operations and still live comfortably. We focused on 3 areas: education, direct support, and policy advocacy. The workshops continued, now structured as a formal curriculum. We created a hotline staffed by trained volunteers, many of them survivors themselves. And we built relationships with lawmakers, law enforcement, and medical professionals to improve how the system responded to elder abuse. Word of our work spread beyond Ohio. I received invitations to speak at conferences in Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta. Each time I stood at a podium facing strangers, I felt less like I was sharing my trauma and more like I was translating it into something useful, something that could protect others. In February, almost 2 years after the fall, I received a call from a producer at a national morning show. They wanted to feature our organization in a segment on elder abuse. Would I be willing to come to New York for an interview? The thought of telling my story on national television made my stomach clench. It was one thing to speak to a room of survivors or legislators. It was another to expose my pain to millions of viewers, many of whom would never understand. But the opportunity to reach isolated victims across the country outweighed my discomfort. The television studio was overwhelming. Bright lights, bustling staff, the artifice of casual conversation amid a tangle of cables and cameras. The host, a polished woman in her 40s, greeted me warmly in the green room. "We're so grateful you're willing to share your experience, Mrs. Lewis. This is an issue that doesn't get nearly enough attention." I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. If it helps even one person recognize what's happening to them and get help, it's worth it. The interview itself passed in a blur. The host asked thoughtful questions, giving me space to explain the complexities of family violence without sensationalizing. When she asked about Ethan, I spoke carefully, focusing on the pattern of behavior rather than demonizing him as an individual. I don't believe my son woke up one day and decided to harm me. It was a progression. Small boundary violations that grew larger financial exploitation that escalated to control and ultimately violence when that control was threatened. The tragedy is that this progression is both common and preventable. After the segment aired, our hotline lit up with calls. Women and men from across the country, many speaking about their situations for the first time. Our small volunteer staff worked overtime to handle the volume, connecting callers with local resources, walking them through safety planning, sometimes just listening as they voiced long-held secrets. One call in particular stayed with me. An elderly man, his voice cracking with emotion, described how his daughter and son-in-law had gradually taken over his finances, moved into his home, and isolated him from friends. "I thought it was just me," he whispered. I thought I was losing my mind. You're not losing your mind, I assured him. And you're not alone. The day after the interview aired, I received another letter from Ethan. Unlike the first, this one came through official prison channels, the envelope marked with the facility's stamp. Inside was a single page, the handwriting more measured than before. I saw you on TV this morning. They show the news in the common room here. I didn't know about your organization or the work you're doing. It's good. Important. I've been in therapy here. Mandatory program. The therapist says I need to understand why I hurt the person who loved me most. I'm trying to understand. Not to excuse it, but to make sure I never become that person again. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted you to know that you're helping people. Maybe even me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the first one in my drawer. Still no response seemed necessary. His journey was his own, now separate from mine. Spring arrived suddenly that year, the lake ice breaking up overnight crocuses, pushing through the soil in my garden almost defiantly. I spent more time outdoors turning the earth for a vegetable patch, repainting the weathered fence. Physical work that left me pleasantly tired muscles aching in a way that reminded me I was strong, still capable. The workshop schedule had expanded to neighboring counties. I trained other survivors to lead sessions, stepping back to focus more on program development and fundraising. Our tiny organization was growing, applying for grants, partnering with larger agencies. What had begun as one woman's testimony was becoming a movement. One Tuesday in late April, I arrived early at the community center for our regular support group. The room was empty except for Ruth arranging chairs in the usual circle. She looked up as I entered, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you. A new woman called about joining the group tonight. She was hesitant to come if you'd be here. It's Claire." My breath caught. Claire, Ethan's wife, ex-wife now, Ruth corrected gently. "She's back in the area staying with a cousin. She wouldn't give details, but she said she needs the group." The shock gave way to a complex tangle of emotions. Anger, curiosity, suspicion. Had she come to spy, to make excuses, to assuage her guilt? I thought of her standing in my kitchen threatening me, defending Ethan. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I said you'd be here, but that everyone in the group deserves support if they need it." I nodded slowly, appreciating Ruth's wisdom, even as I struggled with the prospect of facing Claire again. "We maintain confidentiality." I agreed. If she's genuinely seeking help, she should come. The meeting began as usual, women filtering in, pouring coffee, settling into the familiar circle. I sat in my usual spot, trying not to watch the door. At 6:05 it opened and Claire slipped in. She looked nothing like the polished, confident woman who had once stood in my kitchen. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no designer labels visible. Her gaze darted around the room until it landed on me. For a moment she froze, clearly considering retreat. Then she squared her shoulders and took the last empty chair. Ruth began with the usual introduction, explaining the group's purpose and guidelines. When it came time to share, several women spoke before Claire. Stories of manipulation, isolation, gaslighting, the familiar patterns of abuse. Claire sat rigidly, eyes fixed on the floor. Finally, Ruth turned to her. "Claire, would you like to share anything tonight? You don't have to if you're not ready." She looked up, her gaze moving around the circle before settling briefly on me, then away again. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible. "I was married to a man who hurt his mother. I defended him. I helped him cover it up. I thought I was different, special, that he'd never do to me what he did to her." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. Then 3 months ago he called from prison. He'd been denied parole again. He was angry, blaming everyone but himself. When I suggested that maybe he needed to take responsibility, he changed. His voice became someone else's. He said when he got out, we'd have a long conversation about loyalty, about what happens to people who betray him. She took a shuddering breath. I knew that voice. It was the same one he used the day he pushed his mother. I filed for divorce the next day. I realized I'd been seeing the warning signs for years, but explaining them away. I came here because I need to understand how I became someone who would defend the indefensible. The room was silent. I felt the weight of every woman's gaze shifting between us, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Would I, the mother-in-law she had helped victimize, respond with anger or compassion? I looked at Claire, really looked at her, and saw not the enemy I'd constructed in my mind, but another woman caught in Ethan's web. Younger, perhaps more complicit, but still damaged by the same man who had damaged me. It takes courage to recognize when you've been wrong, I said finally. When you've been part of something harmful. That recognition is where healing begins. Claire's eyes met mine, filled with tears and something like astonishment. She hadn't expected kindness. To be honest, neither had I. But sitting in that circle of survivors, I understood that holding on to bitterness would only keep me tethered to the past. After the meeting, Claire approached hesitantly. Margaret, I don't expect forgiveness. What I did, what I said to you, it was unforgivable. I studied her face, seeing none of the calculation that had once marked her expressions, just exhaustion and remorse. You were protecting your marriage, I said. Sometimes we make terrible choices for what seemed like good reasons at the time. She shook her head. No, I knew something was wrong with him long before that day. The way he talked about you when you weren't around, the way he monitored your finances, how angry he'd get at small things. I saw it all and said nothing because I was afraid of becoming his target. And then I helped him target you instead. Her honesty disarmed me. Yes, you did. And now you have to live with that, just as I have to live with the choices I made. But living with it doesn't mean being defined by it forever. As we parted in the parking lot, I didn't offer forgiveness, and she didn't ask for it. Some bridges can't be fully rebuilt. But we had acknowledged each other's humanity, and sometimes that's enough to begin moving forward. That night, driving home along the dark lakefront road, I thought about the strange symmetry of healing. How the wound never disappears completely, but eventually becomes part of the landscape of your life, visible, but no longer dominating. My cottage appeared ahead, porch light glowing against the night sky. I'd planted new flowers that week, peonies and daylilies that would bloom for years to come. Long-term investments in a future I once couldn't imagine. Inside, I made tea and settled at my desk to review the draft of our organization's first formal annual report. The numbers told a story of growth and impact. 12 counties served over 500 workshop attendees, a hotline that operated 16 hours daily. Behind those figures were real people, women and men who, like me, were reclaiming their lives one difficult step at a time. My phone chimed with a text message from Elise, the young woman I'd comforted months earlier. She'd left her abusive partner, found a new apartment, enrolled in community college courses. Just wanted you to know I'm okay. Better than okay. Thank you for showing me it was possible. I smiled at the screen, remembering my own first tentative steps toward independence. The fear mixed with determination. The moments of doubt followed by small victories. The gradual realization that surviving wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning. Outside my window, the lake stretched dark and endless, its surface rippled by wind. I'd chosen this place for its beauty, but also for its reminder of resilience. How water yielded to storms, but always returned to itself afterward. How it reflected both darkness and light, depending on where you stood. The following weekend, I gave a keynote address at a statewide conference on elder justice. Standing at the podium, looking out over hundreds of faces, social workers, law enforcement officers, healthcare providers, advocates, I felt the weight of responsibility and privilege. The responsibility to represent those still suffering in silence. The privilege of turning personal pain into public purpose. I used to believe that strength meant never showing weakness, I told them. Never asking for help. Never admitting when you're scared or hurt. It took being broken to realize that true strength lies in vulnerability. In saying this happened to me, and I need you to believe me. Their applause washed over me like a benediction, not for my suffering, but for what that suffering had created, a voice that refused to be silenced, a determination to make meaning from trauma. When I returned home that evening, the message light was blinking on my phone. A woman from my first workshop had called. She'd finally reported her son's financial exploitation to authorities after months of preparation and support. Charges were being filed. She was terrified but resolute. I returned the call immediately, offering reassurance, practical advice, a promise to stand with her through the process. As we talked, I glanced at the calendar on my wall. Exactly 2 years since the day Ethan pushed me down those stairs. 2 years since I'd landed at the bottom, broken and alone. Now I stood at the top of a different staircase, one I'd built myself, step by step, choice by choice. I thought of all the women who would climb those same steps after me, each finding their own path to dignity and reclaimed power. After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept Ethan's letters. I took them out, reading each one carefully for the last time. Then I carried them to the kitchen, struck a match, and watched them curl into ash in the sink. Not out of anger or vengeance, but as a final release. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer needed to occupy physical space in my home. That night I dreamed of my garden in full bloom, wildflowers stretching toward the sun. In the dream I walked among them, touching their petals, breathing their fragrance. Wholly present, completely at peace. I woke with the first light of dawn, the dream's serenity still surrounding me like a gentle mist. I made coffee and carried it onto the porch, watching the sun rise over the lake. A new day, another chance to grow something beautiful from broken ground. Another opportunity to remind someone else that surviving is just the beginning. They said I fell down the stairs, I whispered to the morning light. But the truth is, I've been rising ever since.